and we'll go live on Twitch. Here we go. All right. So welcome, Dr. Gordon Nembhard. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit of your background?
Sure. I am an economist, a political economist. I teach at John Jay College, part of City University of New York, in the Department of Africana Studies. I am also a co-op activist, co-op educator, co-op researcher. I have written a book called Collective Courage, A History of Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. I'm very active in the worker cooperative movement in the United States. Oh, thanks. You're doing better than me. I don't even have my book out. Active in the worker co-op movement in the United States, and a mother and a grandmother.
All right, great. Yeah, so as you know, I assigned portions of the book for the class. It's an online asynchronous, so it's work at your own pace. So some students are through a lot of it, some of them are just getting started.
Sure.
And I've given them a wide selection of things to read as well. So if you want to just kind of, I don't know if you can give a quick summary.
Oh, sure.
Basically what the book is about. Particularly
Yes.
for anybody that's like joining us on Twitch, that it's like, okay, what is collective
Courage.
all that, yeah.
Yeah. So the book is about the history of African American cooperatives and the African American cooperative movement. And actually, one of the best ways to explain the book is to talk about why I ended up doing the research. I started the research in the 1990s because I was interested in cooperative economics as a community economic development strategy and an urban renewal strategy, especially for Black and Brown communities. But as I talked to communities, the more I learned about co-ops and the more I was convinced they were an important strategy in community-based economics and community revitalization. But when I would talk to communities about it, especially in Black communities, they didn't see a connection to between cooperatives, co-ops, and Black people. They felt like it was sort of a European, maybe something middle class whites did or hippies did, but not something that Black people engaged in. So I kind of took up that challenge. I started talking to some of my old classmates from my graduate program in economics. I started reading more about cooperative economics, going to more co-op meetings, asking the questions, where are the Black folks, that kind of thing. Nobody really knew except one of my friends and former classmates, Curtis Haynes. He said, start by reading W.E.B. Du Bois. And I had actually known a lot about W.E.B. Du Bois, but I hadn't focused on his economics writing. So now I reread all his economics writings and reread like his autobiography, looking for the economics pieces. And turns out he actually wrote a book in 1907 about African-American co-ops, what he called economic cooperation among Negro Americans. So I really based what I started to do on that. And so I did what's called the snowball effect. Mm-hmm. I said, okay, if Du Bois was interested in co-ops, and we know that for 35 years, he was editor of the Crisis magazine, wouldn't he have written about co-ops in the Crisis magazine? So at the time, I luckily had a research assistant who perused every issue of the Crisis magazine on those horrible little, what do you used to call those things?
The microfiche?
Yeah, the microfiche things, yeah. Right? He was quite a trooper, and he found about 7 articles, which made me realize there were examples. And so what I wanted to do at first was just kind of do a directory of Black co-ops through history, find examples, show that we had co-ops. But the more I got into the topic, the more I started reading the articles I could find. It led me to another article, to another co-op. And then I started to realize that really throughout our history in the United States, throughout what we call the long civil rights period, meaning, resistance movements from slavery times to now, I found that Blacks were engaging in and talking about co-ops, doing cooperative solidarity economics, joining together to address poverty, discrimination, marginalization. And so I was able to put together a whole history from about the early 1700s with mutual aid societies and mutual aid efforts all the way up to the early 2000s, worker co-ops, food co-ops, credit unions, et cetera. And so I organized the book in two ways. I started out doing the chronological organization, and then in the middle of the book, I switched to thematics and talked about the importance of education, the importance of women, the importance of youth, and the importance of solidarity economics as a way to address racism and economic inequality.
Yeah, I don't remember when I first heard about the book. I think it must have been summer last year, in one of the plethora of online free conferences. It was like, wow, I've never been to so many conferences. Yeah.
I know, right? It opened up a lot for a lot of us.
Yeah. So I don't remember if you spoke or somebody just talked about it or what, but when I first heard about it, it just, light bulbs went off, and it's like, I've been trying to find ways to help women of color entrepreneurs here in Charleston, and just hearing a little bit about it. And I think I watched one or two videos of you, and it's like, this could be, really, really helpful. I mentioned it to somebody I was working with in a class last fall, we were focused on environmental justice. And so he works with some communities in Charleston, basically African-American. And, I mentioned the book to him, and he's like, ooh, don't use the word co-op. And I'm like, okay. So yeah, it builds on that point that it's not, people don't see it in the historical roots of it.
Right. Yeah. And have lost, in some ways, we were very alienated, at least from the term. But the other thing I found, the more I studied it, the more I learned, and this is where I also got help from Du Bois again. He talked about economic cooperation, not necessarily only officially incorporated co-ops.
Right.
And that's the other thing. When you talk about what people are doing, right, how they're behaving with each other, what kinds of solidarity economic actions they're doing, that's what resonates. And the minute I started talking about and telling the stories about how Black people came together to do things, whether they formally incorporated it as a co-op, whether it was a little less informal, less formal and more mutual aid or whatever, once I started telling the stories that explain the structures and the relationships, people just warmed up. I got people telling me about stuff that happened in their families, that their grandparents and aunts and uncles were doing. And suddenly it all made sense and connected for people.
Right. Yeah, I think once you start giving examples, it's like, oh, wow, I was just watching, skimming through some videos of you online. And in one, you were talking about Ace Hardware, as a co-op, and Ocean Spray as a co-op. And it's like, those aren't a producer co-op, right? And it's not something you would really think of,
Right. You don't realize they don't really market themselves as co-ops, though sometimes they say it now, but they didn't originally. Now, of course, those aren't Black-owned co-ops, but still, it's
the same
idea that, right.
Yeah.
People just don't, right? Or they think co-ops are so marginal. I was just talking to someone else earlier today. A lot of Black folks, even if they first hear about a co-op, they think it's so marginal. They want to be, right? We're already been marginalized, right? We want to be part of the mainstream. And so then you forget that also. But the other thing I tried to show in the book was, yes, these were sort of alternative marginal things, but when you look at all they accomplished, right? And that's the social economic aspects of the co-ops. You know, they don't just allow you to get access to fresh food at a reasonable price, or a credit union giving you access to financial services in a way that's much more consumer friendly, but there's also all these other market and non-market benefits in terms of how you relate to society, employment, leadership development, other kinds of skills, because being in a co-op requires you to be and have economic democracy, which means you have to pay attention to what's happening to the business, how it's run, how it operates. So you learn all kinds of new skills that you didn't learn. That helps you become more of a leader in your co-op, but also then in other areas in your life. And so there's all these spillover benefits. Most co-ops are much more productive, right? Keep costs low and keep productivity high. And so when you look at all those pieces, then we stop focusing on whether it's marginal or not, and more about, isn't this the kind of ways that we want to own things together, exchange goods and services, and isn't this the way we want our economy to work?
So do you see this like today, as we're coming out of a huge, transformation here through the pandemic? Do you see that as any possibility or likelihood that this might be more common way forward?
Well, I mean, yes, absolutely. And one of the reasons I say that is because we already see much more activity, right? We know that co-ops thrive and tend to proliferate during periods of crisis. One of the things I found in my research was there were 3 major periods for African-American co-ops, and I think they probably map mainstream co-op movement in general, but the 1880s, 1930s and 40s, and the 1960s and 70s. Well, one of the commonalities, at least the 1880s and the 30s, was financial economic depression, right? The 60s and 70s actually weren't, the economy was doing a lot better. But right, especially I think the 30s was probably the period of time where I found the absolute most number of co-ops. And so a lot of them started because of sheer necessity, sheer survival. There was nothing else, no other possibilities. And so people came together and started mutual aid and buying clubs, and eventually created consumer co-ops and credit unions and things like that. Similar, the 1880s, fighting was actually political repression as well as economic depression, and using co-ops again to fight both of those things so that Blacks could have more control over their economics and survive and do more than survive in their economies. In the 60s, it wasn't as much about an economic crisis, but it was sort of, you want to talk about a political crisis, right? Again, it was a period of time of asserting our self-determination and our rights, and using cooperatives as a way to do that. That was also part of the 1880s. So the 60s and 1880s were similar in that sense. And so if you think about that, right, it's only natural that in a pandemic or in bad times, even actually before the pandemic started, we saw a rise in food co-ops and worker co-ops from the Great Recession, right, of what was that, 2007 to 2010 or something like that, right? There was already a rise in co-ops at that point, because remember, we'd had the housing crisis and the financial crisis. People were already responding by saying 2 things. One, capitalism wasn't serving us, right, and didn't have a lot of prospects for serving us. And 2, there were immediate needs, and there were things that we wanted to do as human beings. We wanted economic systems that related to us as human beings, right, to help us get through and to move forward. And so we already had started, the Occupy movement had started using co-ops. And then even before George Floyd, the Movement for Black Lives put out a platform where they included economic justice and using cooperatives and solidarity economic strategies. And so this whole last, what would it be, a 10, 15-year period has really been one about people realizing the benefits, the needs, necessity and benefits for mutual aid and economic cooperation, and seeing how they can be successful. So, even the first months of the pandemic, I remember getting lots of messages about all these new mutual aid societies, mutual aid programs that we're building. So people were already starting to pool resources to help the most needy. Organizations I was involved in were saying, those of you who can donate, and then connecting what we donated to the people who needed it. And so that's already, right, that's the beginnings of what cooperation is. And so we've already seen that in the last 18 months. So my assumption is that we'll continue to see it because people see that it works, right? And there's so much else that doesn't work in our society. The other thing I'm noticing is there also has been a movement and some change in converting existing small businesses to worker co-ops and worker ownership. And that also is proving to be very successful because worker-owned co-ops are much more flexible and stable than small businesses. And so this way, instead of going out of business, have a conversion of ownership to the employees, and then the employees can figure out, right, problem solve, how to stay in business, how to flip a little bit, how to change what they do a little bit. But it's a much more effective, right, structure, especially to address crises. And we also have actually worldwide research that shows that co-ops thrive more during crises, are often created during crises, and also survive crises better than other business structures. And so that, this is a period where we're seeing that among all peoples. But, I have focused on looking at Blacks, and I started to look a little bit at Latinx co-ops, and we're definitely seeing those trends of using them more and more, especially during these times.
Yeah. You mentioned early on that co-ops typically will come out of mutual aid, right? Can you explain a little bit about how that works, the mutual aid?
Right. So a mutual aid society or a mutual aid relationship is a group of people who come together with a mutual issue, right? Interestingly, the very earliest mutual aid societies were burial societies. And I would say, I think why they were burial societies was because these were often among enslaved people who their master didn't care about how they died or how they were buried. But these enslaved people came from African societies where burial was very important, and how you buried your dead was very important. So they came together to make sure that they could bury their dead properly. Nobody else was paying attention to it. So it's interesting that was sort of the first mutual aid societies, but they also had them in healthcare, widow and orphan societies, just for really anything, for pooling money and getting access to capital. But so you pool your money with like-minded people who have similar needs, and then you can do one of two things. Most mutual aid societies, the pooled money is kept until somebody needs it, and then the pooled money is then shared or used to pay out the person who needs it. Sort of like mutual insurance now. In fact, that's right at the beginnings of it. But you also could have what people call the susus and revolving loan funds. Sometimes you also had relationships where people pooled money, but every month one of the members gets the whole pool to do what they need to with. So there were, two different ways to do it. But the idea again is nobody has enough money for anything, but 10 of us put $10 in, that's $100. And each month somebody could have $100, or in 3 months, somebody who needed $400 would have access to that to do what they needed to do. But it requires, right, one, recognition of mutual interests, right? Two, trust, right? You have to know and trust people because you're putting money in and might not be getting it out immediately. And three, even though these are informal, there's some level of formality in the sense of people recognizing the need to systematize how they're working together so that it persists and is transparent to everybody.
Right.
And so if you think about those three ways that mutual aid starts, then you could see how if you start to formalize it more, start to actually create a business or a service out of it, that's when it becomes an actual co-op. And technically, a co-op is an incorporated business, right? And in the US, you incorporate by state co-op laws. And so we don't have uniform federal laws for co-ops, but at state level, but you sort of codify and formalize that mutual relationship. And then we also have a co-op movement, international movement, which has set up a set of values and principles that co-ops follow. And so all the laws that incorporate co-ops also incorporate those things. So there's 7 co-op principles about volunteer autonomous relationships, about democratic participation, one person, one vote, about democratic control over the pooled resources, about working with other community members, about continuous education so that people can be educated enough to run their own business. What's the other principle? There's a principle about helping other co-ops, helping each other, that kind of thing. Okay. So the laws expect those kinds of relationships in order to be called a cooperative, formally called a cooperative. But we also have a lot of sort of collectives, which are a little bit more formal than a mutual aid, but less formal than an incorporated cooperative business.
Okay. Yeah. So cooperative is a legal form or a legal entity.
A legal entity, and it's a legal business form, right? It's recognized as a form of business and enterprise. Right?
Yeah. So something that we need to be adding to our business law class and entrepreneurship.
Absolutely, yeah. And more, they have a new law in the federal government now that the SBA, this Small Business Association, has to recognize and talk about co-ops as a business and worker co-ops, and right. So there's more and more understanding that this should be recognized as another alternative business structure.
Yeah. Well, one thing that kind of comes to mind that or might come to mind to people is, when you talk about people working together collectively, maybe triggers the word, collective bargaining and then unions. So how would you associate unions and cooperatives or collectives?
Right. So they definitely have similar purposes, but also different purposes, right? So a union is really about organizing labor in order for it to assert its rights with the employers, right? So it kind of operates under a system, it assumes a system of capitalist ownership with their employers, and the employees are being exploited and need an organization to fight and advocate for their rights. A co-op actually starts from the opposite assumption, right? So the assumption is not that there's a difference between employees and employers, but that everybody's a member, right? And that members are people who come together with a similar need, back to that mutual aid kind of concept, with a similar need, and create an enterprise to address that need in a democratic way. Now, it's true, I don't want to get too complicated. It's true that there are some co-ops, like producer co-ops, which aren't co-ops of workers, but they're co-ops of owners in that sense. And so can still be some labor tensions, but in general, co-ops are about all the people who need or want to be involved in producing or making available a certain thing, work together. And this notion of one person, one vote, one member, one vote is very essential to a co-op, meaning regardless of how much money you invest in it, and regardless of what your activity is in the co-op, everybody who's a member has the same vote, one vote. You don't have more votes because you own stock. You don't have more votes because you're a manager. You don't have more, right? So there's that level of democratic participation and economic democracy.
Yeah.
So, but there are congruencies, right? There are many worker co-ops that are also unionized. So it's not that you can only be a union or you can only be a co-op or whatever. And there's some grocery co-ops that are consumer co-ops that are also unionized, have the workers be unionized, that kind of thing. So there's crossovers because ultimately, as I said, the purpose is very similar, right? To make life better for workers.
Right.
And then the way that unions work in a worker co-op is to help the worker co-ops the worker owners to focus. The union helps them focus on the worker side of what they're doing, even though they're also owners, right? Because sometimes you focus more on being an owner and decisions as an owner, and you forget to protect yourself as a worker. So the unions help you to do that. Often the worker co-op started with a union drive and then ended as a worker co-op. So they kept their union, even though they didn't, quote unquote, need it at the end. And then a lot of worker co-ops, the union also then gives them, if they're a member of a union, they have more people power to get access to healthcare and other kinds of benefits that they might not have as a smaller worker co-op. So I don't know if that answered all your questions.
Oh yeah, no.
I get more complicated. I'm trying not to make things too complicated.
Yeah, no, it was good. I figured, as somebody's watching this, it's going to be something that will pop in their head, right?
Right. So there's a lot of compatibility. A lot of people don't think there's compatibility between co-ops and unions, but there actually is. But again, you have to be very deliberate about it and make sure you understand the purposes of each of the pieces.
Okay. So one of the questions I like to ask everybody that I interview, and before I started doing, the speakers in class in this format, I was interviewing DJs on Twitch because I got involved on that when the lockdown started. All the bars and clubs and everything closed down, and so people who relied on that for income, they were looking for other ways. So DJs all went on the Twitch, and long story short, I started eventually doing these interviews. And one of the things I like to ask them is what music means to them. But obviously, we're not talking about music. So a variation of that would be, you've been studying cooperatives for a long time. But what do they mean to you? Not, the definition, but, what does it mean to you to study them and learn more about them?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I decided to study economics was because I was very worried about economic inequality and racial economic inequality. And I wanted to understand sort of what economic alternatives we had and why sort of the mainstream world economic structures were so confining, right? And I was hoping to figure out ways to make economics liberatory and liberate us from poverty and inequality and exploitation. So I studied economics, and I studied particularly political economy because that was my understanding that political economy was broader and a better way to understand inequality. And so when I eventually came upon co-ops, which I didn't actually even learn in school, I learned after I got my PhD.
Right.
What was so compelling for me was that this was a liberatory form of economics. The more and more I learned about cooperative economics, and then I actually learned about solidarity economics after that, and cooperatives are actually a part of the solidarity economy. I saw that this was a way to engage in economic activity that was not alienating, not exploitative, and did not sort of remove all the humanity from us. Mm-hmm. I sometimes talk about the current economy and capitalism as a place where we have to leave our humanity at the door before we enter into a workspace or enter into business ownership. And we shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't have to live in an economy that so alienates us from our humanity. We need an economic structure. We need economic structures, and we need to engage in economics in a way that liberates us and helps us to become better human beings. And so for me, co-ops are one of the ways to do that. because of all the principles and values and the ways that co-ops organize production and exchange are ways that are about bringing people together and reaffirming our humanity, and that, right, and reminding us that economics is actually about how human beings can survive, right? Can reproduce ourselves and survive. We forget that because most of the time it's so alienating. We don't even think about it as being something about us as human beings.
Yeah.
So to me, that's what co-ops mean to me. It gives us back our humanity in an economic structure or setting.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because it reminds me that, you know, I started out studying economics. So my undergraduate and my master's are economics. But when I went from undergrad to grad school, I thought economics completely lost that humanity. It went from, you know, these wonderful classes, learning about, you know, why and how things happen, right, and understanding history and the world and, you know, all that, and then it just turned into math.
These math formulas, right, and how to profit, right, profit maximization. What are people doing to maximize their profit, and totally devoid of anything else.
And being taught econometrics by a Greek professor, so you're already using Greek symbols, and then you have a, yeah, so it was, you know, we sit in class, we're all like, what's he writing? What's anyway, but also interesting, because you know, what you said about being a way to help people to improve their economic standing and their you know, all that, and that's one of the things that drives me to study entrepreneurship. Is I don't look at it as, okay, how are you going to, you know, turn into the next, you know, Jeff Bezos. It's more of, we have a saying in entrepreneurship, at least my colleagues do, that when you can't find a job, you make your own, right? And so there's a bit of literature about, you know, the how people who, you know, marginalized by, you know, whatever reason, will tend to start businesses, right? So you have, you know, history of, you know, immigrants to America. Typically, you know, they end up starting small businesses that then become part of that community, and stuff like that. So I'm interested in the future of like seeing, you know, how these go together. But that's another time.
Well, I would say quickly that, you know, cooperatives and entrepreneurship go together. They're not alien, right. You know, they're not contradictory or alienated. For me, cooperatives are social entrepreneurship, right? People being entrepreneurs together. So it's not all on one person. It's not dependent on one person. You know, and I don't know if you have this perspective, but I actually don't even think there is such a thing as an individual entrepreneur. All entrepreneurs rely on other people, benefit from group things and stuff. We just sort of pretend, because we're in a capitalist system, we pretend that entrepreneurship is individual when it's really not. So for me, co-ops are a way for us to really recognize how social and collective even entrepreneurship is, and that we can strengthen entrepreneurship by doing it together, doing it with a mission, with a social purpose, that kind of thing. And so I do think, you know, again, we don't have to be at odds about this, just like unions don't have to be at odds with co-ops. There's a way to think about them all together. And I think it's important because in co-ops, right, for people to recognize themselves as, right, they are entrepreneurs, they are cooperators, they are producers, they are, right, there's a lot of things that we're doing when we engage in cooperation. We don't always name it, but we're doing a whole lot of those things which come together to make it all work.
Right. Well, the reason why I brought it up was, you know, most entrepreneurship research, you know, is focused on growth, right, and profit. But there is a segment that's growing. That's, you know, there's obviously a lot of work in social entrepreneurship, Uh,
Sorry.
I've been teaching it for a while, and I recently started using some work by Daniela Pappy Thornton, and she has, and it's online. It's called Tackling Heropreneurship, and it's this idea that we, put these entrepreneurs up on pedestals, that they created something when in reality they're just part of a system. And specifically when we get into social entrepreneurship and wanting to do good, there's lots of problems there, with the idea that, you could solve somebody else's problem without knowing it and understanding it, living it. But also just the idea that you don't have to start a business to help people. And so a lot of her work is on that, and what she calls systems-led leadership, and about, so there's similar overlap there with that. I just don't think they've used the terms co-op. So what I was saying is bringing these literatures together, right, and seeing, where the benefits could be. I did want to open up for questions. We have some students here.
Right.
Donna, did you want to ask your question that you had posted?
Sure. So in the first several chapters of your book, Dr. Jessica, you had explained that a big part of cooperatives is the fact that they are about instilling knowledge within the framework and amongst group members. And a lot of that proved to the success and the outcome of the business endeavors and the mission of the group. And for me, I consider education as a resource, especially in that manner, because it serves to propel profit and success, and in this case, better economic positioning. So I correlated that with generational wealth and the fact that it's not something that minority groups typically possess, or even like aspire to, because we don't typically have the resources or even the awareness, especially in younger and more millennial generations. So I proposed the question of why do you think this is the case, and in what ways do you believe the cooperative framework in its original and historical form can serve to inspire, bring together, and ensure the creation and passing down of generational wealth and assets and the opportunity that comes from it? And how would you define generational wealth from your own perspective?
Wow, that's a lot. Let me see if I can, how I can do this. So definitely, I think we need a broader sense of generational wealth. You started to hint at it, I think, right? Because the wealth doesn't just have to be financial wealth, right? Savings and property and stocks and whatever. We can also think about wealth, knowledge, right? Knowledge is wealth, and the wealth of a thriving community-owned business kind of thing, right? And the wealth of a tradition of collective ownership and working together. So, I'm an economist. So as an economist, we talk about wealth as being a store of value, right? And your net worth being, all your assets less all your liabilities, et cetera. But I do like, especially when I study solidarity and cooperative economics, right, that broader sense of wealth. I actually think probably, community wealth and access to assets at a community level, meaning joint ownership, having thriving communities that together create an ecosystem of success and prosperity for everybody, right? And I think those things can also be passed down, because we could, from generation to generation, help the next generation to understand how to do this, how to engage in these kinds of more humane, people-affirming activities. And if we live in, housing co-ops, right, you can, your your children can actually inherit your housing co-op, right? Your children can inherit your ownership in a worker co-op, those kinds of things. And so there are ways we can think of these co-ops and collectives as a new way to create new sort of community wealth and a new way to inherit wealth, especially for groups that don't have any of the other traditional wealth, right? We've been actually stripped of our wealth from enslavement on up, right? We've been denied and stripped of wealth. So even if we can't get access to the traditional capitalist wealth, I think we could look at ourselves as building and developing and then inheriting, the collective wealth that we can build. So I think that's an important way to look at it. Another thing, I could get a little bit more concrete. One of the things I do study is youth-owned cooperatives. And that's a really interesting phenomenon because youth, especially student co-ops, the students leave, right? 4 years in a university or a college or a high school or a middle school or whatever, and then you leave. And so you leave the co-op, and what do? But the youth co-ops have a really great way of making sure to train new people, right? They actually reach back into the earlier grades. Even some of the high school co-ops go into the middle schools and start bringing people in, training young people how to come in and be part of the co-op once they're in the grade that they're supposed to be in the co-op, or the youth co-ops in community organizations. The same thing, they'll bring in youth so that when they graduate, when they leave, they already have people, right? So they have a succession plan. They have a way of translating and transporting the knowledge and making sure that there's people to follow them, or at least the ones that are successful, right? Often they're not successful if they haven't been able to do that. So I think we also have some great examples there, right? There was the youth co-op Food from the Hood in the 90s in LA, right? And they did a fabulous job of training the next, not even generation, but the next cohort that would inherit the co-op as they moved on. They also, agreed to save money for high school scholarships as they graduated. So they were looking backward and forward, right? And that's a kind of transmission of wealth, right? They were able to save a lot of what they earned in the co-op for their future, and they saw their future as going to college, right? That actually even changed how the school saw them, and the school actually put in a college prep program because now they had these students that were going to have some money and interest in going on to college. So you could see all the ways that some of the stuff you were talking about can kind of bubble up and coalesce in this kind of a solidarity cooperative system. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's sort of the way I would interpret it. And those are some of the things that I found exciting about these studies, is learning about the ways that these different groups, even again, sort of marginalized Black young people that we would think have no control over their lives and no way to really earn an income, are doing really fascinating things. And that one co-op is not the only kind. The other thing, you started out with education as a resource. And so I just want to talk quickly. One of the surprising things I found in my research was how important education was. And I knew education was an important principle of cooperatives, but I didn't realize for the Black community, almost every co-op that I found information about how it started with a study circle. People coming together to study together, to talk about what their problems were, and then to use cooperative economics to solve their problem, and then to study cooperative economics together before they even open their first co-op business or whatever. And so that's why I wrote that chapter on co-op education as a co-op resource, because it turned out to be so essential, especially in Black co-ops, but I suspect in most co-ops, because not only did people need to learn about how to run a co-op together, they needed to learn how to do the business, right? They needed to learn that together. They needed to learn how to make decisions together. And that also gave them capacity as better human beings. It also developed leadership, right? Which is another kind of form of wealth, I would say. And it also goes back to David, what you were talking about, right? In co-ops, I also learned from worker co-ops how important different kinds of leadership are, and that co-op ownership allows people to assert different levels and kinds of leadership, both in the co-op and then to use those leadership skills out in the rest of the world, in their families and in their civic lives. And so that's another kind of wealth that the education provides. And then the final thing I would say that education provides is its cohesion and solidarity. Learning together really helps people to trust each other, to have a sense of cohesion, and that helps to keep the enterprise together and thriving.
Yes, that was, did that answer everything, Donna?
Yes.
Yeah, well, that was a great question. And early on, you used the word value, you know, and talking about, you know, what we measure, you know, in economics and business and all that. But in my thinking and a lot of reading, you know, there's been ideas of, you know, expanded understandings of what is of value, right? And so, you know, you've already expanded on some, and there was comment in the Twitch chat from DJ Friend, who says he's run a few artist co-ops, and that knowledge and art are both shared wealth. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot that can be considered value and wealth. So, you know, I mean, you know, health, happiness, all those kinds of things are valuable, right? We just don't have great measures for them, you know. I wanted to I'll just remind students, if you have a question, you can raise your hand or add it in chat. So
we had also talked about women's roles in Black co-ops. Is now a good time for me to talk about that? I thought I might have a question about it, but I know we're running out of time, so I didn't want to not talk about it.
Yeah.
I said, you know, sort of the role of education and how important education was a surprise for me. Well, the other surprise that I probably shouldn't be surprised, but was a surprise, was how strong a role Black women had in Black co-ops and the Black co-op movement. And what I learned, in addition to sort of observing that women had a stronger role than I expected, and even a stronger role than in traditional co-ops, was that, again, going back to the mutual aid societies, that's one of the reasons Black women have had a strong role, is because they had a strong role in mutual aid societies. At some point in our history, you know, like more than 60% of mutual aid societies were started and run by Black women. And so they already sort of were used to, right, being involved in these collective activity and problem solving, doing economic problem solving in their communities, right, trying to help, doing community building, economic problem solving. They already kind of had those roles in their communities. And so from between moving from mutual aid to co-ops, or getting involved in co-ops, was actually more natural than we would have thought, because of how Black women were already relating to their communities and stuff. Now, some of the Black women leaders had actually been, you could trace that they had been leaders in a mutual aid movement first, and some weren't, but again, so you see sort of that whole trajectory. But the other thing that was really fascinating to me was to see how, you know, and again, it's similar if you look in the Black church, if you look at other movements, the women are sort of in the background doing all the scud work, keeping everything together. They were doing that in co-ops, but they also were leaders. They were sometimes the president, often the organizer, and then even some of the Black co-ops that were led by men, I found accounts where the men were saying, if it wasn't for the Women's Guild, if it wasn't for the women keeping us together, making sure we were still studying, putting in their energy, the co-op would have failed. And so it's just whichever way you turned, right? Either the co-ops being started by women, being run by women, or the Black men saying how beholden the co-op was to the women. Just almost every story had one of those, if not two of those elements. So really fascinating for me, especially as a Black woman, to see that role, to see a consistent role, and to see the recognition, right? Because that's the other thing, often there's not the recognition, but to see the men actually recognizing this was really important. And then I started to try to focus on co-ops that were owned and run by Black women. Some of the worker co-ops were, some of the credit unions and financial co-ops were, a lot of the arts co-ops were. So we have lots of great examples. Freedom Quilting Bee with women quilters who were sharecroppers, right? Using the quilting and the quilting co-op to advance their community, their families, and then their communities. Women nurses, creating co-ops, schools. There's Maggie Lena Walker in the 1800s and early 1900s who's doing banking. And it was actually her mutual aid society, which then created a mutual bank and a co-op bank and a affordable housing and a department store. So, they went big. So the myth that Black women and that women can't run these things and can't run big organizations and can't handle this kind of stuff is just blown away when you look at this history.
Yeah. So why do you think that there were so many women involved in leading these co-ops and movements?
That's a great question. I hate to say I don't know why. I don't really know why, but I can speculate a couple things. As I said, partly I think it's because women in general, but also Black women in particular, have had to and been the ones who have been sort of the stewards of community and well-being, right? Their families' well-being, their community's well-being. They have stepped up often. Sometimes it was because the men were so, the hands were so tied of the Black men, right? Black men, have been in some ways more exploited, but not in other ways more exploited than Black women, but in the economics in some ways, right? Black women have been able to do more. And some of it, I think, is just because of, I hate to sound like such a reductionist, but, women tend to be more in the caring, do more of the caring, nurturing, and community organizing and community development stuff. We just tend to do that. So I think partly all those things bleed into, so then they would naturally be the purveyors of the more humane economic structures, right? I think some of it then again is we're just doing it, and then we tend to do things in more cooperative ways. I mean, they're actually, if you want to get into the science of it, I did come across a study that was actually talked about in the New York Times about, 15 years ago, 10 years ago. It was a study done at Emory University, and they found that all human beings got endorphins from cooperating, but females had stronger endorphins and that endorphins were stronger and lasted longer from cooperation. So if you want to get to the science of it, maybe we have these endorphins, right? So it makes us feel good, and it lasts longer and feels better than men. So we do it more often than that. But I also think just the roles and the functions that we played in society have made us more in the caring, right? More about caring and organizing and that kind of thing. And so then, right, mutual aid and cooperatives are part of that whole caring, humane economics way of operating. And so I would say it's that, but I don't know that we know for sure.
Yeah.
But I think those are some of the things I think that would help us to understand that. We've always found a way.
Yeah, I mean, there was, a perfectly good answer, I think. I'm just reading. The BJ friend here says he's got so many questions he needs to read more. So, one thing obviously to read is this book.
Collective Courage.
Yep.
Yes, I would love for you to read it. I am working on a graphic novel version, but it won't be out for another year or so.
Yeah.
But there also is, as you said, David, you've watched a lot of my videos. There are a lot of my videos out there.
Yeah.
So you can also start there. I give a lot more examples. Sorry, I didn't end up giving that many examples in this talk.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, like I said, yeah, just did had a Google search in YouTube, and there's plenty. So you've been busy spreading the word.
I've been trying.
Yeah. What do you think that those of us who have some interest in it but aren't researching, studying, and all that could do to help educate community and move it forward?
Well, I mean, there's a lot everyone can do, no matter how much or how little you know about this, right? First of all, as you said early on, sometimes the terminology is off-putting to people. So just, again, telling the stories, talking to people about what you're learning about this topic and how you're realizing it's much more expansive. It's much more a liberatory way to talk about economics. It's much more expansive way to talk about collective action, right? Or collective economic action, right? Talking about that. But then also, again, even though I didn't do it today, but telling the different stories of some examples. And I often tell people, there's two things you can do pretty quickly that are easy, right? One is to just come together with other people who are interested in this and start studying together. Whether it's reading, you don't have to read my book to study together. You could, start to look at what's happened in your own community and study examples of what mutual aid and cooperation that people in your community have done. You could come together to try to understand what's happening in your community and how an alternative economic vision might actually better address a problem in your community, and then start to learn about that. So just coming together and talking to other people. A lot of the co-ops started not even talking about cooperative economics, but talking about the problems, and then discovering, and then using cooperative economics to solve the problem. So they came to the co-op economics later, after first starting to talk to each other and whatever. Even one of the prison co-ops I study, that's what they did first. They realized they wanted to start a business with their art. They studied different business models and decided the co-op model best suited them, and then they demanded co-op education from their jailers. So there's stages and ways to get into this, right? Also, just trying to think, to highlight stories. You could do interviews with people who are doing some of this stuff, and just highlight their stories and make sure to get the word out that these kinds of alternatives are happening and we should be supporting them, right? So so it doesn't have to be hard, and you don't have to become some economics expert, right? It's more about, you need interest, and then you need to communicate, right? You need to talk to people.
Right. Yeah. So obviously examples are very helpful. Is there other terminology people use in place of cooperatives?
Well, with the solidarity economy, I've been trying to kind of use both terms, solidarity economics and cooperative economics. But I was also just on a conversation where we were talking about what's called the cooperative identity, which is about not just those principles I started to mention, but also cooperative values, which are very similar to the solidarity economy values. So those are about equity, equality and equity, diversity, democracy, things like that. So also just talking about, and then a bunch of us have also talked about an economy of abundance rather than an economy of scarcity. And you would know, you studied economics, right? Mainstream economics is all about scarcity. How do you manage scarce resources? That's actually one of the definitions of economics, even though that's only a mainstream economics. It's not all economics. But so we started using the terminology about the economics of abundance, right? Where we see, right, the world around us there's abundance, especially because we have, as human beings, we have the imagination and the ability to use our imagination to solve problems, right? And to open boxes, right? Not to box ourselves in. So if you look at, right, think about abundance and collectivism and solidarity economics and ways that people work together to solve economic problems, collective economic action, economic democracy. So there's lots of other terminology that are all a part of being in a co-op or being part of cooperative economics without having to say the word co-op or cooperative. We could also try to resurrect and save the word co-op and show that it doesn't have to mean that narrow thing that people see it as, a Whole Foods store or something. It doesn't, right? There's so much more things that are cooperative and co-ops than just that.
Yeah, I
But,
mean, when you bring up economics and talking about it, one of the things that comes to mind is one of the first lessons in international economics, is the or maybe it was just basic anyway, macro or whatever, the idea of trade, right? Division of labor specialization is, in my thinking, has some relation to co-op, right? You're better off. The idea here is you're better off by specializing and then trading. So
right. And in a co-op, you could do that not as separate entities, but you do it within the same enterprise, in the same organization. Everybody, right? You can still specialize, but you share what you know with what everybody else knows, and you put all that together to make more expertise, more knowledge, more productivity. Right. So instead of separating, in order to specialize, we're pulling all our specialties together. There's also a movement called asset analysis or asset building, right? Instead of looking at everybody's deficits, you look at everybody's assets and what resources they have. So this, pooling resources is also a way to do that. You see that everybody has assets, has resources, has something to contribute, and we pull it all together to make us all stronger. So that's another way to look at it. And that's why it works, right? Because we're making us all stronger by coming together, by combining our forces and combining our expertise and specialties and skills.
Yeah. Well, so one way of thinking about it in my mind is, when we compare the traditional economics, right, of trade versus doing it collectively or cooperatively, it's changing the definition or changing the perception of profit from an individual to a group. So that's one thing.
Absolutely.
Another thing that just sprung to mind when you were just talking about asset-based is a theory in entrepreneurship called effectuation. And this is by Sarasvathy, whose dissertation chair was Herbert Simon. So she had great access to be able to study entrepreneurs, and she had them go through these thought exercises. Speak aloud. She recorded them and then went back and was like, what are they thinking? And one of the things that she found, and is part of her theory, is that expert entrepreneurs differ from novice entrepreneurs in that they begin with what they have and what they know and who they know. That's where they begin, as opposed to where they want to be. They say, okay, this is what I have, this is what I can do, and then let's see, and go from there. So there is a complementary theory in entrepreneurship. Obviously that's still got the individualistic sort of goal into it, but it definitely involves a network and other people. It's just not at the cooperative level. So yeah, I could keep talking about that. Oh, there we go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes. So bringing that pooling of resources is not just about pooling money, but it's about pooling all our expertise, all our in solidarity economics, we also talk about gifting, right? Giving our gifts and sharing our gifts, right? All that makes us stronger, makes the enterprise stronger. And also if we're solving economic problems that way, right? Then we're solving it in a way that makes invisible value visible, and also strengthens all the things that we all have.
Yeah.
And so I think those are important ways to view all this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and when you talk about problem solving, of course, I think of creative problem solving, and so a lot of my research was based on creativity and looking at history of all that. And so one of the things that I teach about that is um, when we define what creativity is the generation of novel and useful ideas. What makes something novel and useful? What makes it novel is that so if you think about an idea, it's a combination of bits of knowledge. That what makes it novel is that those bits of knowledge are distant. They're very from diverse areas, right? And so if you want to have creative ideas, you need diversity. So when I was teaching managing diversity class, I talk about that, and a bunch of students were like, light bulb, right? So I see a connection there, right? When you're working collectively, you're bringing in more knowledge, more experience, more connections,
Absolutely.
right? Because as I say, if you could somehow pull out every bit of knowledge from somebody's brain, there's no two people on earth that have exactly the same full set of knowledge, right? Everybody has some different, right? So there's something different they can bring, and so the more people you involve, the better solutions, more creative solutions you're going to be able to have. So there's definitely, from a creativity perspective, definitely a benefit of cooperatives.
Right. Exactly. And that's we flippantly say two heads are better than one. Right.
Yeah, right.
But that also is what this is all about. And then for cooperatives, right, the other piece is it's not about profit maximization. It's about solving problems and collectively, right, figuring out how people can collectively address issues and collectively benefit. So it's about profit sharing. Co-ops actually call it surplus. Most of the time, they don't even like to call it profit. But, profit sharing, pooling resources in order to benefit everybody, or the maximum amount of benefit. So it's more about maximizing benefits, right? Maximizing participation and maximizing benefits are really what cooperatives and cooperation are all about.
Yeah. And that, of course, reminds me of marketing, which was my PhD, and focusing on the importance of benefits, user benefits, in products, which is not exactly the same thing, but it is, trying to get people to think about benefits, at least with a product. And again, so I'm thinking to myself here, how do I make these connections? And there's, there's so much that, really is very closely tied, right, between what we teach in business and, what is essential to cooperatives. So, yeah, I could see this definitely. I remember one of the first things that I learned after discovering your work was something about the idea of early management theory that is not included in the textbooks that we use. So that these there was economic theories in African American communities that predates what became the theories that are taught now in school.
Right. Yeah. So some of this actually, I think First Nations did it, early African civilizations, right? All these notions of the Commonwealth and commons and cooperation, right, are really, capitalism is actually really late in human history. It's one of the last economic forms. And, hopefully it's running its course, because I really do believe we need to go back to the systems that are more about people. And as I said, maximizing participation and benefits rather than maximizing profits.
Right.
But we do have, if you go back, I think really I can argue for any civilization, any population, if you go back to their origins, it was all really about solidarity economics and cooperative economics, from hunters and gatherers, right? They were doing that together and sharing what they got, right? They didn't, one family didn't just eat the whole elk, right?
Right.
everybody ate it, and they ate every part of the elk, so they weren't wasting the
Right.
elk, and they weren't hoarding the elk, right? So all those early systems really were based on gifting, reciprocity, collaboration, cooperation, helping each other so that we could all survive, because they knew
Right.
that if we all survived, each of us individually had a better survival rate than if we all tried to fight each other about it, right? So this fighting each other for survival is really new and not very successful, and I don't think it's very sustainable. Which is the other reason why I study this stuff, because I don't think we're in a sustainable system. I think we need to get back to a sustainable system that also reinforces our humanity.
Speaking, so the idea of just, the basics of society, going back beyond, as cooperation, that's an interesting way we look at it. And I was going to say something else. And
then I'm going to have to go in a minute.
I lost my train of thought, but I can't remember now what I was going to say. Anyway, so I appreciate you taking your time. The final question I always ask people is, what gives you hope? And I leave that broadly open to however you want to answer the question.
Well, what gives me hope in this field is all the great examples and practices that I keep learning about and hearing about and finding out about, knowing, right, that people already do this. It's just a matter of how we can elevate it, get us doing it more, get us actually seeing what we do, and that what we do is worth it and productive and worth doing more of. So I'm really hopeful when I see all the examples, as I said, in the last 18 months, all the new mutual aid societies and mutual aid activity, all the new co-ops that are starting and groups that are studying co-ops and are interested in co-ops. It gives me a lot of hope, especially that we can come out of this, horrible pandemic, some of the worst things that have happened to our society in a century, right? But I believe we can come out of it better, stronger, and better as human beings, right? And seeing how we've reacted and how we've managed through this makes me excited and hopeful about that. And then, on a personal level, I'm hopeful because I have grandchildren. And so I hope and believe in the future, because I feel like I can see it. I can, it's right there, in front of me. And our that generation is already so smart and so savvy. I feel like, they're gonna do that problem solving and keep us moving toward a better society.
I completely agree. I've noticed, in over the years, this growing idea of, wanting to make the world better, as the basis of thinking as students that are coming through. But I remember what I was going to say before was that there's been for a long time, there's been talk about, the changing capitalism, right? That it needs, and that was very much in the, environmental, realm. But this last year has really, brought it much more mainstream. The idea that our system is broken, and we're continuing to find that out. Like you see, people, there's a problem right now of people not wanting to go back to work in the service industry. Why? Because that was broken, with people being grossly underpaid,
and horribly treated.
So that is something that has given me hope. I at the start of this, I predicted that things were definitely going to be different on the other end. I didn't quite think it would be as dramatic as it was, or as it is. But I am definitely hopeful that, you know, through this, we're really rethinking everything. And hopefully, you know, we can move more towards these cooperative economic models. I will certainly spread the word where I can, with class here and then on Twitch, YouTube, all that, just to add more out there and help make this world better.
Yeah, no, I feel hopeful both for economic justice and for racial justice. I think they have to go hand in hand.
Yep.
But I feel like we're making progress on both, and people can see, right, see the progress, see where we could go. And so I think that makes it hopeful too, that people are starting to practice and starting to see where we could go and how we could do things differently.
So thank you very much for taking your time to speak with us.
Thank you.
It's been really very interesting, very great conversation. So thank you. Yeah, Donna says thank you.
Yeah.
And with that, I will go ahead and end the stream and stop the recording.